Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this Lockdown LitFest event where I am delighted to introduce you to Curtis Jobling. But before I do, as ever, we hope you're well, we hope you're keeping safe, and we hope you're being careful. Curtis Jobling is the designer of the worldwide hit children's TV show Bob the Builder, of course, and the author-illustrator of numerous children's books. His early work on Wallace and Gromit and Mars Attacks led Curtis to picking up his crayons in 1997 to design the BAFTA award-winning Bob. His own animated series, Frankenstein's Cat and Rah-Rah the Noisy Lion, can be seen on the BBC. Now, although he's renowned for his work in film and TV, his true love has always been horror and fantasy for older audiences. His acclaimed series of epic fantasy novels, Wereworld, was published by Penguin. His darkly comic young adult thrillers, Haunt, Dead Scared, and Haunt, Dead Wrong, were published by Simon & Schuster. And he's got a fantastic new series called Max Helsing and the 13th Curse. There are other books in the series. You sharp-eyed people will know that we've sadly been unable to teleport Curtis into the Lockdown LitFest virtual studio. However, the bonus of this is you get an insight into the creative kitchen of the creative mind of the creative Curtis Jobling. Curtis, a very warm welcome to the Lockdown.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, yeah. Welcome to the wheelhouse. This is where the magic happens. Yeah, absolutely. The kitchen. Don't get me started on things that are on the fridge. We'll draw a veil over that one straight away. I'm very well, thank you, Paul.
It's very nice and very kind of you to allow us into the Jobling inner sanctum. I'm delighted to hear that you're well in these strange and unusual times.
Aren't they just? Yeah. If any point in time cats, dogs, or children run through or shout or fight, apologies straight away. That could always happen. That's the life I live at the moment.
That's the joy of living in a lockdown world. We're all living together. We're trying to be our best to be separate and together and apart all at the same times. It's also why, ladies and gentlemen, you play the big money for shows like this. It's live. Something could go wrong and probably will, and it'll only happen once. Keep your eyes peeled. Curtis, what I want to do is I want people that don't know you, because everybody knows your output, and I'm sort of very conscious that people consume the output, they see the results of your creative mind, but they don't really know who you are. So can we do a little bit of a voyage around Curtis? I mentioned in my introduction about you picking up your crayons in 1997, but what led up to that? Where did you realize, either as a young boy or as a teenager, that actually you've got a huge talent, and I assume something you love doing? Is that true?
Yeah, I think as with many people who work in creative industries, my career is born out of the hobbies I had when I was a child. So from a very early age, I was always encouraged by my mum to be creative, be that taking me to the local library, or there was always paper and crayons and pens to draw, paint and colour in. So my mum kind of always encouraged that creativity, not with one eye on it being a potential career years later, but just as a pastime. So I've kind of got my mum to thank for a large part of the career I ended up pursuing. It wasn't until I got to art college where I realised that I wanted to work in the animation industry and also write for a living as well. However, growing up in the northwest of England in an industrial town, there wasn't an obvious career path. There wasn't an avenue that you could take, which would get you into working in film, television, and publishing. Growing up in the northwest of England, most people from my school ended up going to, if you didn't go on to university in an academic subject, you would probably have ended up getting fitted for a hard hat down at the local ICI, the local power plant. So yeah, pickings were small as to what to pursue. But yeah, reluctantly, my father allowed me to go to art college, and the rest is history.
Well, that's quite a big decision, from various backgrounds. I know when I was thinking about, what I wanted to do when I was 16, 17, people were sort of quite dismissive of going to art college. I might come back to that in a minute. First of all, can I establish, I'm here, although in the virtual studio that you see behind you, I'm here in rural Warwickshire, sequestered in lockdown with my 80-year-old dad and having quite a nice time. Whereabouts in the world are you right now?
In Warrington, which is my hometown. Grew up here. I was born in Blackpool, grew up in Warrington from the age of 2. Left here when I went away to art college, travelled around a little bit to different cities to work in television. And then I ended up back in Warrington for a few years. And then I moved away. I didn't think I'd be coming back to Warrington anytime soon. But years later, in order to spend more time with my son, my wife, Emma, and I moved back to Warrington in order to be close to him. So Yeah, we've been here for about 10 years, 10 years or so. Warrington's a lovely town, great sort of network to get around to north, south, east, west, train lines and what have you, but it's not really what you consider to be it's not an artistic mecca, let's put it like that.
Well, it is while you're in it. So can we assume, therefore, that the flat cap you're wearing is not a style statement, it's part of your DNA?
Yeah, this is a uniform, what you see here. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Flat cap, this was before Peaky Blinders. I used to wear the flat cap. Yeah, very proud of my northern heritage, certainly.
For kids who are watching who love stories, and who of us doesn't, I like that you referenced your mum who got you into it, but of course you have this double talent, which is quite rare in my experience, that you can not only tell stories through images, through the illustrations that you do, but you're quite, I mean, I hate to use the word wordsmith because it's too lackadaisical, I find, but you're very, very good at creating stories with words as well. Does that work? Is it separate parts of your brain? Are they ring fenced? How does that work?
I think so, yeah. So when I was, from my early childhood, I always loved reading. I was always found with a book in hand. And if I wasn't reading a book, then I'd invariably be watching old adventure serials on TV, the kind of King of the Rocket Men and Flash Gordon. They were a staple for me as a child, which they were for my father before me. So I'd sit there with my dad and watch those shows. And it was all about escapism and the fantastic for me as a child. Art was the avenue that I took through art college. But I always had one eye on telling stories. I learned to tell stories because of the hobbies I played, things like role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. I was always the guy that ran the games with my friends. But that's where I learned to tell a tale and spin a yarn. It was by playing these games and hobbies with my pals. So that kind of always stayed with me. And even when I was at art college doing my HND in illustration, I could have been working harder at the art side, but to be honest, every evening, or plenty of evenings each week, my friends and I would get together and pull all-night role-playing sessions where I would run these huge, vast adventure games with my friends, which I would write. And I had 2 years at this particular art college. The first year, I ran this huge campaign, which was it's set within Middle-earth. It was based on the world of the Lord of the Rings. And I ran this huge sort of multi-strand storyline with all these about 6 or 7 guys playing it with me. And the second year, I ran a kind of a gothic horror campaign set within the world of H.P. Lovecraft, Call of Cthulhu. So I was pulling upon the things that interested me from literature and from cinema, and giving my own spin on them, telling my own sort of stories. So that was where I cut my chops telling stories, was running these huge campaigns and playing with my friends' emotions and seeing them laugh, be scared, fall in love, have absolute fury with one another, pulling the strings basically on their emotions. And that was where I knew then that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write for a living. But it took me getting established in the animation industry as an illustrator and designer before I kind of carved out the opportunity to spend time working on my writing, which I did over a couple of years, culminating in me getting my first commission with the first Wereworld novel.
Which is brilliant. Talk me through this. I mean, I know for those of you watching, Curtis's reference to Dungeons and Dragons. I'm 56 years old. No, I'm not. I'm 57. I'm so old I keep forgetting. Dungeons and Dragons, when I was a student, used to be a fantastic board game, a role-playing board game. Does it still exist, Curtis?
Oh God, yeah, it's huge. I mean, we're in a bit of a golden age for tabletop gaming. So board games and role-playing games, they're everywhere now. It's a huge industry. Kickstarter has made it more possible for more games to be produced.
Right.
And there's all kinds of opportunities for games out there for adults to play together, for kids to play, or even families to engage in. So my wife and I and our daughters and my son, we quite often get together and we'll play, board games together as well as an escape, sort of from the certainly the world we're living in at present. Anyway, that kind of is terrific. But yeah, Dungeons and Dragons has been relaunched and rebranded recently and is a huge industry. I believe there might even be a Netflix or Amazon Prime TV show in development based within the world as well. So yeah, it's big business again, possibly in no small part thanks to the success of things like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, quite exactly. Is there an online version of Dungeons and Dragons? I don't know this, but I have fantastic sort of nieces and nephews
online. Yeah, you can find stuff online kind of systems. So a lot of people now, because of lockdown, are playing I'm hearing on the grapevine, but lots of kind of gaming groups who traditionally would get together on a weeknight, get some pizzas in, big can of Coke or pop or whatever your poison is, and sit around a table with their friends and take part in this social game. A lot of those guys now are using online platforms to play the games, to use online systems to generate dice rolls and things like that. So they're still having, much in the same way as you and I are now speaking over the internet, guys are still playing their games and girls are playing these games as well. And it's unhindered. And if anything, it's kind of, it's evolving into a different kind of gaming experience.
I'm delighted to hear that. I said in the intro that your true love has always been horror and fantasy for young adults. Can you explain to us what setting up a horror fantasy novel, what are the requirements, first of all, and what liberties does it grant you? Because you're asking people to enter a world that is entirely of your own creation. Having done so, of course, that has responsibilities. But then having got people to come into that world, where can you take them that sort of real world stuff doesn't permit?
I've been asked that question. Theoretically, when you write a fantasy novel, then the world's your lobster. You can do whatever you want with it. You create what you want. You decide the rules of that world and what logic, if there is any, that kind of impacts upon the character's existence within the world. I kind of write from the heart. I write the stories that I think I know. So the world I've kind of created in the Wereworld series is a kind of a medieval fantasy version of Northern Europe, for want of a better description. That's where the story starts. But crashing into that is this world of shape-shifting werelords, these characters that, it's obviously a werewolf is the hero of the story, but there's all sorts of different, there's lions, bears, tigers, oh my, all these different sort of characters that he encounters throughout the story over 6 books. But that is inspired by my love of transformative horror and the films that I loved as a kid, things like American Werewolf in London, the John Carpenter film The Thing, even the old Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman of Larry Talbot, which looks a bit hokey now compared to the special effects that you see today in cinema. The old version of Lon Chaney Jr., master of special effects, but admittedly he did look like he was covered in glue rolling around the floor of a barber shop. I'm sure there are more convincing werewolves out there to be found, but that inspired me as a child. That kind of absolutely captured my imagination, and that's why when I wrote a fantasy novel years later, transformative horror was always going to play a part in that. I think that hopefully the thing that is clear from my novels, and the reviews tend to come back from professional reviewers, was a compelling world building is what I'm able to provide in my writing, possibly because I've had my head in the clouds for so many years, cloud cuckoo land and being a daydreamer. Building those worlds came relatively easy to me, I think, and telling them and describing them in a convincing fashion. It kind of goes without saying, any fantasy world, it needs to be believable. That's where world building is so important.
Exactly. What age are they aimed at, the Wereworld books?
Well, the Wereworld books are probably aimed at sort of large man-child like myself, really. They say, write for yourself. To a degree, I did that when I wrote the Wereworld book, although my heart always kind of lay close to the world of middle grade and young adult fantasy. So that is where it kind of sits. I would say it's the top end of middle grade, literally bleeding into young adult as well. But when it was published, it was classed as middle grade. But yeah, it's the top end. It was kind of 12, 13 was a target audience for it. Okay,
let's move on from werewolves. Bring us to vampires. Tell us about the Max Helsing series, which I really, really love. So I suppose we're going from werewolves to vampires.
The Max Helsing series, again, I used to get a lot of stick from, not a lot, but intermittently I'd get complaints from parents saying, my children are reading these books, they're too scary, you shouldn't be doing it, it's not right, you're poisoning my little darling's mind. And I just thought, well, not really. I wanted to write books that were scary, that dealt with fear. Fear being an emotion that we can't run away from. We encounter it most days in some way, shape or form. I wake up most mornings screaming, and so would you, Paul, if you had 3 daughters like mine at home, trust me. But how we cope with fear is what makes us human. And the best way for us to experience fear, undoubtedly, is through reading a good book. The worst way is being chased down the street by a gang of bullies. But yeah, reading a good story is a great way to approach fear. It's not going to hurt you. It might scare you, and if it really scares you, you can shut that book and throw it in the chest freezer in the garage. So, best of all, through literature, scary stories allow us to approach fear, and you can talk about those feelings that you encounter in a book with parents, with siblings, with family members, with friends and teachers as well. So I'm a big advocate for writing scary stories. Vampires, one of my strongest memories I have as a child was the late 1970s, the Toby Hooper TV series of Salem's Lot, the novel by Stephen King, and those particularly kind of certain scenes, such as the tapping at the window and floating around when we have that scene, and when the master suddenly appears and he's got the bald head and the kind of Count Orlok, Max Schreck kind of face vampire. Those things are seared into my mind. And so, yeah, the vampire story, I kind of go back to every time. I wanted to write a story which dealt with a modern age monster hunter, a modern age vampire hunter, and that's why I wrote a story called Max Helsing and the 13th Curse, where it's a 12-year-old kid who basically discovers that he's last in the long line of the Van Helsings.
So I was about to ask you, who is Max? Let's do that, actually. Talk us through who Max is. What does he represent? Who is he? And why do you like him? Because there's something rather poignant about your relationship, the author, with your character, Max Helsing. I'm, an old man now, getting way beyond middle age. But even I love Max Helsing because inside the decrepit old body, is a curious and enchanted 13-year-old boy in many ways. Yeah,
it's a coming of age story. Max understands the world. He's 12 years old. He lives in a little town in New England, just outside of Boston, on the road out to Salem, monster country. And yeah, he's always known that he's a vampire hunter, and that he has to kind of hunt down monsters. Schoolwork gets in the way of it in that regard. So he's aware of who he is and what his role is in life. But he's dealing with different sorts of monsters from sort of kind of classic monsters like your vampires, zombies, ghouls, werewolves, and then cryptozoological mysteries like your Sasquatch, your Jersey Devil, the Mothman, Loch Ness Monster, whatever it might be, and then fairy creatures like gnomes, trolls, elves, and pixies. So it pulls on all sorts of different mythologies, both classic and kind of traditional and cryptid ones. And it's just an excuse for me to play around with that kind of monster of the week, encountering different creatures and writing fantastic tales, but set within a contemporary world setting. So hopefully it is relevant to, well, even more relevant to the target audience of kind of middle grade adventure hunters. I think a show like Stranger Things has perfectly kind of proved that you can write a middle grade story, which is also going to appeal to teenagers and adults as well.
Did you see that, ladies and gentlemen? He snuck in a 7-syllable word. So I have to ask, Curtis, what does cryptozoological mean?
Oh, cryptozoological. I did. Yeah, cryptozoology. It's one of my favourite words, alongside a couple of others that I can't possibly repeat here. Cryptozoology is the study of misplaced beasts, creatures that supposedly exist within our world, but nobody has enough evidence to say that they're real or not. The most we can manage is some blurred cine footage of something crossing a creek in the sort of Pacific Northwest, or a footprint in the snow in the Himalayas. Every kind of culture has their own kind of cryptozoological myth. And yeah, it's that kind of folk horror kind of element that kind of draws me in as well.
Does it have to be horror? Because of course I'm thinking of the Cotterley fairies, which are supposedly fairies at the bottom of the garden. Do they?
Well, that was obviously proved to be the scam, where the daughters were cutting out images.
The daughters were cutting out and using hat pins and stuff like that.
Exactly, and superimposing them over glass sheets and stuff into the garden. Very clever, cunning.
Yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle. So
yeah. I'm more in the Houdini camp than the Arthur Conan Doyle camp. Houdini was the man. You've heard that story, haven't you, about Houdini and Conan Doyle?
Tell me.
So Houdini spent much of his life obsessed with the paranormal and the occult, and was, I'm paraphrasing a lot of this from what I've read in the past, but he was desperate to find out that there was proof of an afterlife and that ghosts existed and that we could contact the dead. He was great friends with Conan Doyle, and they spent a lot of time together. And one of Houdini's visits to London, he was desperate to speak to his mother that he'd lost at a younger age. He wanted to reach out there and find some way of kind of reconciling with her. And he visited stayed with the Conan Doyles, and Lady Conan Doyle had basically arranged for a séance that they were going to go to. It was going to be hosted by London's premier charlatan, let's say, for want of and they went along to see this medium who, and it was all for Houdini. The whole thing was set up for that. And the medium had made one fatal mistake with her preparation, as all these things are, for the most part, prepared in advance. And when she started to claim that she could see and speak to Houdini's mother, she said, I'm seeing it, because she knew that she'd been told basically that Houdini was a God-fearing man. Mentioned the fact that she could see a crucifix, and that was kind of, and that was the light that was leading her towards the mother. And at that point, Houdini got up and walked out. Houdini was Jewish. Yes. Crucifix meant absolutely nothing to him. And at that point, his relationship with the Conan Doyles broke apart. They absolutely parted on the most bitter terms. And for the rest of his life, his remaining years, Houdini went around debunking mediums and psychics.
Yeah.
So, that sort of thing I adore. I love it. Great stuff.
Love it too. Now, listen, you've offered us a bit of a treat today, which is you've got some drawings that you're going to show us. Can you talk us through what you got and how you come up, how the illustrative design part of your mind works? Would you mind giving us a little showcase?
Yeah. Okay. So we can see here we've got this is the earliest design of Bob the Builder that I did in 1997.
Oh wow!
And basically, it's just playing with sketchbooks. It's playing with shapes and sizes. Any character design job for animation or illustration, for me, is playing with shapes. And this is it's that earliest design. And it's not in Mars.
When does this date from, Curtis?
This was 1997. It's pretty much the first design that I submitted for Bob. And as I say, it's not a million miles away from the character that children and adults grew up with, but I had to make some changes. The feet are too small. He couldn't stand up on the set without falling over because it was a puppet animation. So I had to give him big fat work boots. The hands were too small, so he couldn't work the tools. So we gave him big fat jazz hands. The moustache, I thought I was being clever giving him a moustache. The reason being is this. If you think of Wallace and Gromit, when Wallace speaks, more cheese, Gromit, his mouth goes all over the place.
Yeah.
24 times a second, we stop the camera, we step in there, we remove the mouth, we replace it with a new mouth shape. It's called lip synchronization. Happens in any animation. You don't have to do that, though, if your character has a moustache, certainly one that covers the mouth, because when he speaks, all you do is waggle a tash. It was a cheat. It was a shortcut. I was being clever. Too clever for my own good, though, because the boss of CBeebies pointed out that preschool boys and girls are apparently scared of facial hair.
Oh, really?
That's where your license fee has gone into the research into this thing by the BBC, Paul. I don't know what that research involved. I do have an unhealthy imagination, though. I like to imagine the chief executive of CBeebies, a lovely old lady, I think bushes outside a preschool wearing a fake beard. And when the kids walk past at home time, she leaps out and shouts, "Boo!" which would scare me as well. So Bob had a shave, the mo had to go. And last of all, I said, let's give him a big pair of sideburns. And when he takes his helmet off, he's completely bald. Apparently that wasn't funny. I had to give him a wig. But that's how Bob came into being. Yeah, that was 1997.
Good heavens. What do you got next?
Next up, after Bob, I started to develop my own stuff. So Frankenstein's Cat got turned into a TV show.
That's beautiful.
That was a picture book that I'd written and illustrated for Hachette, for Hodder Headline. And that did great business as a picture book around the world. And then it was turned into a TV show, but it was drawn animation was the approach that we went for this. Ultimately, though, I wanted to make my own puppet show. And finally, eventually, I got around to doing that with McKinnon and Saunders, my old collaborators in Manchester, when we made Rah Rah the Noisy Lion for the BBC. I'm Rah Rah's dad. I'm the creator of Rah Rah. I'm the designer of Rah Rah. And I write a couple of the episodes of Rah Rah as well. And there he is. See, he's not very big at all, is he? All hairy and smiley. And yes, there's Rah Rah as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware it sounds like my chair is sitting on a cat. It's not. Don't worry. Because my chair has suddenly developed a squeak of its own. And being in lockdown in Warwickshire, there are children next door who've decided to kick their football against a fence. So I do apologise for the noises off. That's fantastic. So is Rah Rah there? Is that made of plasticine? Is that plastic?
No, he's silicone. It's silicon, yeah. Things have moved on. In the Northwest, the studio that I did a lot of collaboration with was called McKinnon and Saunders. They used to make all the puppets for Cosgrove Hall Studios back in the day, people who made Wind in the Willows and Danger Mouse. But their model of animation used to be latex. They used to have latex molds with puppets in, and then they've moved on to using silicon, which is harder wearing and it lasts a lot longer. It tends to be, you think of plasticine, you think of Wallace and Gromit. That's down in Bristol. That would be Hardman's expertise.
Lovely Mr. Nick Parr. Let's make an insight. So when these things come out of your brain, you put them on a piece of paper. When you actually get to hold a three-dimensional character, is that quite a moment for you?
Do you know, in the same way as it is when you're published as an author, when your book when you get sent the proof, or you see it on a bookshelf in any bookstore, it's a similar kind of buzz. It's that same feeling. You know, it's it lives moment where it's suddenly a living, breathing thing. And obviously air dates and publication dates, it's a similar kind of experience as well. But yeah, when you enter the world and pick up the model in the set like this, it's a pretty special moment.
I know from having spoken to authors over the past years, the one thing that they really appreciate and really love is when readers get in touch with them and tell them how their words, their books, their stories, their characters, their creativity has moved readers in the same way that often moves them when they're writing it. Do you have the same thing when people feed back to you, whether it's about Bob or whether it's about Rara or whoever? Do you get that thing of, I made that happen, I made that person feel that way, and that's a good thing for the world?
Yeah, I've especially with my animation stuff. Yeah, it's quite. I mean, the impact that's had. I mean, when you look at Bob translated into every language on the planet, shown in every corner of it, #1 Christmas singles, all sorts of crazy stuff that went with it, countless specials with cameo appearances from, oh God, Elton John, Chris Evans. We had a huge list of celebrity guests who's Noddy Holder, all wanted to appear on Bob the Builder for whatever reasons. To this day, I still meet people who remember from their childhood, or I'll get a kid getting a novel signed by me somewhere, and they say, my dad wanted me to tell you that his favourite show when he was a kid was Bob the Builder, which makes me feel horribly old when I hear that, trust me. But I also hear from certain children who suffered from hidden disabilities, such as autism, who it helped them get through those difficult years. That they had there's an obsessive nature to their watching of the show, but they were so immersed and invested in that show that it helped them through those early years and very difficult times. And even into their teenage years, they were still so deeply invested in that particular show, in the case of Bob, that it kind of stayed with them. So yeah, I quite frequently get messages. And the same things happen with Rara. Rara ultimately is a communication show. I didn't make a show that was about selling toys to kids. I don't want to do that. I want to make a show that's going to help children develop in some way, shape or form. In the case of Rara, communication is at the heart of that show. And I would never make a bold claim such as, a diminutive Hispanic explorers on Nickelodeon might say when Dora stands there and speaks to the TV screen and the TV screen supposedly speaks back. That doesn't happen. The way we communicate is through conversation with loved ones, parents, siblings, and grandparents when we're little. So in the case of Rara, we made sure that we had speech and language therapists working with us on the show. Every episode is bootstrapped with rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and retelling, which are the 4 R's of communication that any child, and any adult for that matter as well. That's how children learn to communicate. Television will never help children, teach children how to speak, no matter what those Nickelodeon shows might tell you. Television will only ever be the dessert option on a child's menu of development. In the case of us with Rara, we knew that we were making a show that was basically, if it was the dessert option, it was the fruit salad. That was the kind of thing that we took with us.
That's a really nice analogy. I've never understood this because I'm not terribly visually motivated. What do these characters represent? How do you put character into a line drawing to begin with? I know it's a really tricky question. I understand what I'm asking and what I'm asking you to answer, but
goodness. Do you know what? I mean, because we're in lockdown, Paul, what might be a nice idea is because I could talk about that at length as well, about why characters are designed in such a way, but maybe I can show you a broader portfolio of my work. With my early design work pre-television, before I got into getting those big breaks, and then I can show you an evolving portfolio for an illustrator. I mean, obviously, lockdown, LitFest. I know you're embracing literature first and foremost, but
we're embracing story, and we're embracing
exactly
story and creativity. That's
perfect.
Curtis, that's such a generous offer. It would be an idiot to turn it down. Would you mind very much?
No, absolutely. Yeah, we can do that. I'll do a presentation with you in the next couple of weeks where we walk through that portfolio and we can kind of chart the path that I took to doing what I do today, because much of it comes through that illustration. And I am a writer. I write novels for older audiences, but the thing that kicked the door down for me in the first place was that ability to draw and tell stories through pictures. So we can certainly we can do that. Yeah, I'd love to.
I'm so flattered and humbled by that offer. So, ladies and gentlemen, coming up over the next few weeks on the Lockdown LitFest, Curtis Jobling is going to take us through his evolution of his characters and as an illustrated storyteller. It could be, I don't know, I haven't seen it, a masterclass on how to create characters. So get your kids involved, get them signing up, come to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and we will keep you in touch with developments through the newsletter at www.lockdownlitfest.com. Curtis, that's so generous of you. Can I ask what you're working on at the moment? What's exercising you at the moment? What are you doing?
At the moment, so the Wereworld books, they say things come full circle. When I got out of television years ago, it was because I got kind of a little bit disillusioned with it, with the nature of the industry in children's television. It had become everything seemed to be about exploitation of creative individuals and IP, intellectual property. It was all about making money, and I'd never really got into television and broadcasting as a means to make a fortune. I just wanted to make a living telling stories through film and moving pictures. When my career as writing novels took off, I kind of thought I was done with television, foolishly. Those things are changing now, that my books are getting optioned to be turned into TV shows and developed as well. So, two of my books, Haunt and Wereworld, are now in development to be major new television series. So I'm actually script writing. I'm working on the development of scripts at the moment, trying to knock that into form and shape. I cannot tell you who I'm working with. I'm sworn to secrecy on that front presently. I'm working on the development with some really amazing people, and if it takes off, it will be lovely. And if it doesn't, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But exciting times.
Can I ask you a question then? Two things. How script writing, very different gig, much more collaborative. Are you used to that? Is this a happy experience? How's it going?
Collaborate. I'm working with a comedy writer on one of my shows, producers on others. It is a different experience, but it's similar to working with an editor in publishing. Anybody who works in publishing will know what that's like. When you hand over your manuscript, whatever draft it is, to your editor or even your literary agent and get feedback, there's a cold dread sometimes as to what you're going to get back. And that doesn't go away even years later, working on adapting a book into a screenplay or a script. It's the same kind of challenge as well. But having gone through those revisions with my novels and working closely with an editor, I'm ready for that as well. I'm not afraid. And if anything, I always welcome feedback. I'm a collaborative person by nature. Working in television for so many years taught me to be that way. I'm not so arrogant that I don't think I need an editor. If I ever was that arrogant, shoot me. I think anybody thrives from having somebody that they can bounce ideas from. And whenever I say to young writers who are just starting out, what advice can you give? I say, find somebody that you can trust, that you can get feedback from, that you can not collaborate with necessarily, but somebody whose opinion will help you become a better writer and give you constructive feedback and criticism as well. So that working with different people, it's exciting, it's thrilling, it's nice. It feels like the solitary job of a writer has changed a little bit for me now. I'm back working in a bit of a team environment.
I like what you just said about find somebody you can trust that can give you a first minute. And I suppose it's not by accident that your wife is an incredibly highly regarded editor for all sorts of publishing companies. Is she your first reader?
She is, yeah. She has been for all my books. Yeah, she's the novels. Yeah, that was the funny thing. Emma Jobling works for numerous publishing houses across the UK and sometimes overseas, but as a proofreader and copy editor as well. And she's brilliant. She's one of those good Nazis, the grammar Nazi. My favourite kind. But in the case of the Wereworld books, huge reader. She devours books at a rate of knots. And when I wrote the Wereworld series, on each one of those, every time I got on the phone to go over the copy edit, the final version before it went to print, I'd get on the phone with my editor at Penguin, the copy editor there, and we'd go through all of their notes from a proofreader against my notes as well. But my notes invariably were Emma's notes. She would go through it and mark out all the points where there were errors or inaccuracies in the writing. And for every single one that a professional proofreader would find as a comment and a markup, Emma would find 2 different markups. So she was picking up stuff that the professional proofreaders had missed. And this happened with every single one of the Wereworld novels. And when we got to the 6th and final novel, again, I was on the phone with the proofreader, with the copy editor at Penguin, and they all knew Emma's work and thought she was great. She said, "Okay, on to the page 3." I said, "No, on page 2, there's a stacked word there. It's repeated again, and that needs." "Oh, how have we missed that?" "Oh, well, good find, Curtis." I said, "It wasn't me, it was Emma." And she said, "Oh, I wish we had an Emma here." And I said, "You can have mine. I'm done with her." It was a throwaway comment, a glib, cheeky gag at my wife's expense, but instantly the copy editor jumped on it, and she said, "Do you think she'd be interested in working for us?" And from that moment, she tried out for them. She aced the test, and now she works for, as I say, numerous publishing houses across the UK. And yeah, she's brilliant. She's got a really good eye for understanding the structure of telling a story, as well as spotting those sort of mistakes, grammatical or spelling, whatever it might be.
You're a talented family. One last question from me. We're in lockdown. There'll be families watching this, I hope. If there is an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 30-year-old who thinks, actually, I really like Bob the Builder. I really love Ra Ra the Nile. I love Curtis's work, didn't know it was him. In the same way that Picasso said, drawing is just taking a line for a walk. What's the first piece of advice you would give to someone that thinks, I've got ideas in my head, but there's a block between getting them from my head onto a piece of paper? Can you help them out and give them a bit of a 101 and say, this is what you should do?
If it's illustration, it's get a sketchbook. Get a sketchbook and get doodling, get playing, generating ideas. Just in the same way as if you want to get into writing, I would say write a page a day or 100 words, 200 words a day. Get into the habit of doing something in a repeat fashion every day. And obviously, just like riding a bike, the more you do it, the better you'll get. Practice makes perfect. So the more they draw, the more they get used to being confident with the line, the better they'll become. If you do want to get into illustration or animation as a designer or any other kind of creative capacity, get that sketchbook, but also get used to doing life drawing as well. Draw people. That doesn't mean going to classes where you have to draw naked people with all dingly dangly bits. That doesn't mean you can just draw your nan. And when I say your nan, please make sure she's fully clothed. That goes for her as well. But just draw people. And the more confident you get at drawing people in a realistic fashion, the more confident you'll be in then drawing things in a more abstract or cartoon or stylized fashion as well. It doesn't cost a penny. When I was at art college, I used to go to Chester Zoo and just sit on a bench drawing people, because people would walk around the zoo and they'd stand still for minutes at a time as they viewed something within an enclosure. So it's a perfect opportunity for somebody to strike a pose and then for you as an illustrator to then draw that person as well. So that's how I got used to drawing and building up my sketchbooks and becoming a more confident artist as well. So yeah, sketchbooks and drawing people. That's my advice.
Good. And just one last thing, is there anything, we have audiences of thousands, hopefully building to tens of thousands as we move forward. We're still in our very early days. So do forgive us for our technical glitches and so on. We are doing our best. But what we're trying to do, we're not trying to recreate a TV studio. We're trying to recreate a literature festival. So do bear with us. But Curtis, for the fans of yours that are watching, have you got any message for them?
Or if this was in a couple of months' time, I'd hopefully have some really mega news to say. And keep watching this space. If you're fans of my writing, I am working on new stuff as well. I'm writing endeavouring to write an adult novel as well. But yeah, I'm not done with Wereworld yet. I'm kind of still working within that the 7 realms. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled on that front. Keep reading by all means. Yeah, and if you have read the Wereworld books, yeah, hand them over to a friend as well. Send them in the post. Doesn't cost you, just cost of a stamp. Let them read your copy as well.
That's a really good idea, Curtis. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, listen. Curtis is such a huge talent. it's been really kind of him to spend his time with us here today. So just bear in mind a couple of things. One, you'll be able to buy his books through the button that will appear below this very screen on which you are watching. Two, you're my witnesses. He promised we could have a masterclass from Curtis Jobling, which will hopefully include a bit of a guided tour around his writing room, his study, his drawing room, so we can see where the magic happens. And three, that we're here, we're trying to help. We're trying to give you some decent creative content that amuses you, entertains you, and lifts the veil on how some of the geniuses that work in this country and around the world create the products that we love to consume. Thank you so much, Curtis Jobling. Thank you to you for watching. Come and join us next time. Look after yourselves, be well, be safe, and take great care. From the Lockdown LitFest studio, cheerio.